Good morning, everyone. The Simple Handicap for Wednesday, September 1st. NFL team previews continuing on with the Baltimore Ravens today, breaking into the top five, coming in with a rating of 78. And we are on the home stretch of the NFL team previews. Two more of them tomorrow, two more of them Friday, Saturday, Sunday off, and then the Simple Handicap, as you have come to know and love it, will return in its regular format bright and early Monday morning as we close in on the start of NFL Week 1 for 2021. How exciting is this on the home stretch? It's been a long 4 to 5 weeks now that we've been doing these team previews, so it's going to be fantastic, obviously, to get into betting. And I will say, I was about to fire away on a couple Week 1 bets yesterday afternoon, but as I'm now a year older, potentially a year wiser, a little bit of extra work, a little bit of thinking about it before clicking on it, sort of had me go the other way on a couple of different totals, rethink it, and start looking into a couple different angles to take advantage of. So those will have an update. I'm going to be sending them out on Twitter probably to start, but there is a set home for those now that I'll be sharing in the next coming days. Everything will be free. All of the write-ups you've come to love over the last couple of seasons, and actually many more years than that, will be available to read for free for the entire season. It's not going to be behind the paywall anywhere. Everyone will be free to read it and participate with it. I will have an update on it a little bit later, but the Week 1 card already looking interesting, so I'm looking very much forward to getting into that bright and early Monday morning. Baltimore Ravens, 78. Interesting team. If you've listened to the podcast any of the last couple of seasons, you'll know that for the better part of 2 years now, I've been higher on the Ravens than a lot of folks. But it's been a team I've continuously gone to and bet on, did very well in 2019 with them, did relatively well with them last season, although would have loved to get another win from them against the Bills in the playoffs. Didn't happen, which derailed a little bit, but still was a profitable finish to the year just betting on the Ravens. This year, I don't know. And I'm comfortable saying that this is a top 5 team to start the season because you heard the podcast yesterday about the Packers and how relative to their price, I think everything's quite high. But if I'm comparing the two teams, I think there's more here with Baltimore outside of the quarterback position than there is the Packers. And when you add in the coach-quarterback combo for Baltimore, as well as the schedule that's easier than what the Packers are facing, giving the edge to the Ravens here just by a small margin, I think is a fair argument to make. Baltimore higher than Cleveland. I think that, based on what I said, is a fair argument to make. And then New England, Dallas, Seattle, LA, Tennessee, no concerns there. Maybe because I'll do sort of a bit of a retro on these ratings later, but I'm potentially a little light on Seattle. But again, it's just a team I don't know necessarily how to talk to, but it fits. And then the other 4 teams I haven't talked about, San Francisco, Tampa Bay, Buffalo, and Kansas City, 2 teams from the NFC, 2 teams from the AFC. I can make a clear case for why those teams are going to be better than Baltimore. And so when I said with the ratings, you always work right to left in that 0 to 100 scale, right? And you have the team and you just go down the list. Are they better than this team? Yes. Are they better than the next one? If the answer is yes, keep going. If the answer is no, that's where they are. And clearly the 4 in front, I feel very confident are going to be better. But I see Baltimore preseason anyway at this point better than the Packers, Browns, Patriots, Cowboys, Seahawks, Rams, Titans. And so that's, I'll obviously get into why, but I think that it's fair to put them here. But in general, I just know a lot less about this team than I do in seasons past. What I would relate that uncertainty to is very similar to the reason why I was willing to oppose the Rams so frequently the last couple of seasons with Jared Goff in certain situations. Teams figured out McVay, the 11 personnel with 3 wide receivers, Goff, and how that offense works. They figured out how to defend it. The blueprint was out there, and the Rams could never adjust around it. I believe that teams, as we saw last year, have got very close, if not all the way to figuring out how to defend Lamar Jackson and this offense run by Greg Roman. It's really, really simple. And we saw everybody selling out to stop runs from Lamar. And we saw everybody willing to let him throw outside and take away a lot of the passes that he loves over the middle. Running backs for the Ravens last year had a very good season. Lamar regressed in almost every category when it comes to running the football on the ground. Now, where it gets interesting is the Ravens had their best games against the weakest defenses and their worst games against the best defenses. And so it became a situation where even though a lot of teams tried to do the exact same thing, from a betting and a handicapping perspective, it was very important to look at the defensive talent and scheme and evaluate whether the talent was good enough to stop the athleticism that the Ravens have on offense. Watkins was added. Bateman was drafted. Brown is still there, but there's injuries sort of circling through the skill positions. J.K. Dobbins obviously lost for the season just a couple of days ago. So even though there's more names here, I don't know if any of these guys necessarily change that. And it's a very similar situation on the offensive line. Last year was one of the worst offensive lines we've seen the Ravens have in a number of seasons. But this year there's Bozeman at center dealing with some injuries. Zeitler's got some injuries going on. Ronnie Stanley, same thing. We don't know exactly when he's going to be back. So there's uncertainty still up front on the offensive line. And so even though there's a lot to believe in when it comes to the scheme, I think that defenses, for the most part, have really gone a long way in figuring out what you need to do to defend this offense. So there's going to be a lot of onus on Lamar to have a big year here throwing the football. We know how good he is at running out of multiple wide receiver sets. The way that they utilized heavy personnel in 2019 with that blocking scheme up front was incredibly effective. And there was that surprise element going back to that McVay-Goff thing when in 2017 when they were running all those different looks out of three wide receiver sets consistently, keeping it the same up front, but all these different plays. It was very hard to defend. Once defenses figured that out, that surprise element was gone. All of a sudden, it became a lot less effective. Same thing with the Ravens. They had all those heavy personnel sets in 2019, Lamar's MVP year, were incredibly efficient, blocking up front, running the football, and then Lamar throwing over the middle. It was great, but in last year we saw that wasn't necessarily the case. People figured it out. In 2021, the opposing schedule of pass defenses goes from 26th a season ago, so the 6th easiest schedule, to the 8th most difficult. So it's an enormous step up in opposing defenses. So handicapping this team this year, there's a lot of focus needs to be put into that. And there's a lot of terrific secondaries here on the schedule. And so on one hand, we know how great of a coach Harbaugh is. We know how dynamic and athletic of a quarterback Lamar is. We know how dominant this scheme can be. But can they do enough differently, or can Lamar be effective enough throwing outside that it doesn't allow defenses to just collapse in the middle? And it keeps them honest and it creates some space, and that's where this team can dominate. That's really the question each and every week this entire season. And the last 2 years, I felt like I was very confident in knowing the answer, and they would get the most of that in so many different ways. This year, against the schedule, favored in 14 games with a very high win total, they're sort of maxed out from the price point perspective. I just don't know. I think it gets a lot more difficult for them this year. From a defensive perspective, it was a very similar situation last year. Man coverage, almost every single snap with Wink Martindale, try to generate a ton of pressure up front, but now you're dealing with a couple of new pieces. You're dealing with injuries to a number of guys in camp, key pieces as well, and you're going to have to rely on that sort of all-in boom or bust defense. But yet again, the schedule gets a lot more difficult. And there's a lot of great quarterbacks that this team is set to face. Last year, again, when they had to step up and play those great offenses, they went 2-4 against top 10 offenses and opponents. And so you look at the schedule down the list this season, and it's another game against Patrick Mahomes. It's a game against Herbert and the Chargers. It's a game against Carr and the Raiders. It's a game against Mayfield and the Browns twice. It's Burrow back healthy twice. It's Aaron Rodgers and the Packers. It's Kirk Cousins and the Vikings. It's Matthew Stafford and the LA Rams. And then it's Tua, who's very much improved with the Dolphins. Like, it's you're looking down the schedule, and there's only a couple layups here from an opposing quarterback perspective where you're getting a true dud on the other side. And so, again, like as great as these names are, as great as the system can be, it's just tough to be fully confident when you're looking at this price and how high it is on the Ravens. And so this is probably a review that sounds sort of very pessimistic overall about Baltimore. That's not necessarily the approach I'm trying to take here, but I'm saying that this team is one you have to handicap on a week-by-week basis and really put a ton of value on the opponents, both offense and defense, and how they match up specifically against the Ravens. And it sounds like an obvious thing to do, but like with a lot of teams, you just sort of fall into the mindset of just chunks within the personnel, but you have to get like really, really specific with the matchups here and the familiarity that opposing defensive coordinators have with this scheme and some similar run-orientated schemes, because if Lamar can't figure out passing outside and this offense just allows defenses to collapse in the middle like they have been, I think it's going to be really, really tough, as great as this defense might be. But if the defense takes a step back and sort of falls into that 10 to 14 range, this offense is probably going to need to be better than they have the overall talent and continuity to be, to match this high price point that has been put on them as a team in the preseason. So super high expectations. A lot of things need to go right. I still think that this team coming into the preseason is better than those handful of teams I've mentioned that we talked about in the last week or so. And once we get into the top four tomorrow, that's where I sort of have that last and final tier. And so we have 4 more previews to go, a lot more optimism in those other 4, but Baltimore just a weird team that's sort of jammed here in the middle between the final 2 tiers that I have within the league. That'll do it for me today. Enjoy your Wednesday. I'll talk with you tomorrow.